All right, so today we're going to do a little overview of Qualtrics. And so for the workshop, the kind of like the first half chunk is going to be on some more basic stuff. So like creating items, how to randomize, things like that. And then we're going to switch into a more sort of like some trickier things that you might not have to always do. And there are also things that can typically be done in multiple different ways, but we're going to show you like the way that we typically do them. And of course, if anyone has questions at any time, let us know. And then also, I think between me, Kareena, and Juana, we'll all kind of like pipe in with like thoughts of like, this is also what you could do, or this is like maybe another way of doing it or anything like that. So yeah, I think Kareena's gonna start us off though.
Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right, so let's make this. Okay, so this is our Qualtrics page. We're on the survey view, and so for today's purposes, we're mostly going to focus on the survey view and go a little bit into distributions. So kind of like what Ashley said, I'm going to go over the very basics, kind of orient you to Qualtrics and just kind of dip your toes into like how you use Qualtrics, what are some of the basic things that you can do. So first I have this intro block, and we're going to use this to show you how to create a question and the different types of items that you can create. So over here we have create a new question, click on the caret, and here are all the options that you can select from. So at the very top we have static content, so descriptive text would be something like instructions or potentially like a prompt that you might want participants to see. Graphic would be like adding in any type of image. And then here we have standard questions. So this is what I mostly use. Of course, we ask a lot of multiple choice questions. And then if you go over to the caret, you can see that there are a ton of different formats that you can choose from. So a ton of different single answer formats. And then same thing with multiple answer. We can use graphics, we can set it up vertically or horizontally, things like that. We see the same thing for text entry. So single line, multi-line, essay, format, slider, side by side. So again, there are lots of different formats. I tend to avoid formats like this because it is a little overwhelming from a participant's point of view, and we want to make sure that everything is as clean as possible and that they're able to see the questions very cleanly and answer them the way that they actually mean to answer them. There are lots of options down here as well. Again, I mostly just use these standard questions, but there are lots of different types of formats you can explore from or explore depending on what you're interested in looking at. And then some of the advanced ones I'll go through in a moment, but let's first start with the standard questions. So I am going to create my first question using multiple choice. And so here I'm going to minimize this because it is a little bit in the way. There we go. Okay, so here I'm going to ask my first question, which is, do you like pizza? Right, and then my answer choices are going to be yes, maybe, no. So it automatically fills it. So let's say I think that liking pizza is a yes or no question. I can change the number of choices to 2. Let's say I think it's a more nuanced question, so I don't think it's just yes or no. I think that there are different levels of liking pizza. We can modify that and change it to like 5 different choices, again, just depending on what your question is. We can also edit the type of question on the side here. Even though we originally selected the single answer, we can change it to multiple answer, drop down, item, select box, multi-select box, things like that. There are a couple other options down here as well. So like forced response and request response. So if you select forced response, this means that the participant can't move on until they give a response to this question. In general, I'm very careful about when to use forced response because I think depending on the question, we don't necessarily want to force participants to answer every single question if they don't feel comfortable answering a question. Again, it does depend. So I think a lot of people tend to lean towards request response, which would basically prompt them as soon as they go to continue to the next page. It would let them know like, hey, it looks like you missed a question. You might want to go back and answer that, because sometimes especially if there are a ton of different questions. Participants may skip over a question and accidentally leave one blank. Okay, so now that you've seen how to create a basic question, we're going to go into what surveys typically look like, what are some of the components, and what are some of the still basic but slightly more advanced things that we can do. So generally, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. So generally, surveys start with a consent form. And so here, this is actually a survey that Ashley created. The consent form should usually be in the form of a graphic. The reason why we have a graphic is because we want to use the PDF consent form that the IRB approved of, so that we have this stamp right here. So this is the consent form that the IRB kind of recognizes as being official. And then at the very bottom, we have a question asking if they consent to participate. I do think that if I ever use a forced response, I would use it here, just so, because we absolutely have to have their consent in order to participate. So that's probably the only time I ever use it. Okay, and so going on to our first block of actual content, here we have this block with page breaks. So the very first thing that they're going to enter is their ID, so that we're able to use their unique identifier to kind of identify their data, or like kind of keep them together.
I do notice that for this one, I have some tricky sort of ways, kind of like survey flow. So it might be better. I don't know if you already looked at it, but it might be better to go down to like not the next one, but the next chunk, because that's a more like just normal one. This one, it's gonna look like I'm saying the same thing over and over.
Well, I was just going to quickly show that I wasn't going to go into this because I know that you're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I was just going to show that this is like a text entry format, and that you can, depending on what you're interested in looking at, you can change the type of response that you're looking for. So let's say I know that their prolific ID that they enter is always going to be 3 characters. I can go over to the validation type right here, click on character range, and make it 3 minimum and 3 maximum characters allowed, just to make sure that they're entering the right information. You can also do things like content validation and have them enter an email address, or any of these options like here. And so this is the very first block that Ashley has in her study. As you can see, there's a page break here. So from a participant's point of view, blocks and page breaks are kind of the same. So it basically, blocks kind of exist on their own, and then page breaks also exist on their own. So like you see them individually. And so Ashley has this all in one block because she wants all of these items to be together for like survey flow purposes, which she'll go over in in a few minutes. But then she also has page break here, so that this item shows up on its own for participants. And so going over here, so that one of the things that she uses here is she's using a prompt that she wants participants to think about. So in this example, she's asking participants to think of a recent time when they did not confront a friend who did or said something, and which she'll go into kind of like the piping of what that means, insensitive or offensive. And so she wants them to sit there and think about it, and potentially not like just move on without really reflecting on this. So what we can use here is a timer. So this is one of the options that was listed under the advanced. And so what timing allows you to do is it allows you to force participants to stay on a page for however long you want them to stay on. So there are a couple options here. So you can modify this so that they're not able to submit, so they don't see the continue button at the bottom of the screen until 30 seconds have passed. Or you can change it so that it's auto advanced, so that after 30 seconds passes, then it automatically moves them on to the next page. Okay, and then so one other thing I did want to show you is display logic. So in this example, let's say they're not able to think of a time where they did not confront a friend for, this thing. And you ask them here, were you able to think of experience, or were you not able to think of a relevant experience? If you had everyone move on in the same way, they wouldn't be able to answer, like, so potentially, I guess in this example, people who do not have a relevant experience, they wouldn't be able to answer questions the way that Ashley wants them to answer the questions. So we might want them to see a different prompt. So in this example, we are going to have people who have thought of an experience to move on to incident response, but we want these people to see a different prompt. So we're going to go over to this block, and what Ashley set up is display logic, so that here you go to the settings button and then add display logic. If people selected, I do not, for this question, do you think of an experience, I do not have relevant experience, is selected, then they're the only people who see this secondary or alternative prompt. And then same thing here. And then so once everyone has seen the prompt that they need to see, then they move on to this question block, and they're able to fill out these questions that kind of all together. So another thing I did want to show you is, let's say for whatever reason, you wanted participants to see all these different items in a random order. You could go over to block options and select on question randomization. And there are a couple different randomization options that you can select from. So you can select randomize the order of all questions, where every single question that is in that block is randomized, or you can select present only a total of like 5 total questions. So 5 of those items would be randomly selected, and those ones would be presented. Before I go to distributions, is there anything else as far as item format that you guys think should be covered in like the basic section?
Oh, just a quick note about randomization, Kareena, is if you go to the advanced section in the randomization, you can also have it so that you have like one of your questions is the description of like, you know, in the next, so you can add the questions that you want to randomize in the randomize block there, and then like leave out whatever you want to show up as first or second or so on.
So, okay.
And I think I can go over that in more detail in.
Yeah, because I know that you're going to go over the randomization in the survey flow, right?
Yeah, and I'll just review that again, because that's what I typically use, because I almost always have some sort of prompt at the beginning of a thing. So it almost never works for me to just say randomize all.
Right. Okay. So there are a couple other options for the survey that are still somewhat basic at the very top. So you can go to look and feel, because we're NYU, we have this, the NYU theme automatically set up, but you can go to presets and go to like different types of themes. I'm not gonna go to survey flow, that'll be Ashley. There are survey options, so you can add in a back button, save and continue, things like that. I know if you're using Prolific, for example, you can redirect to a full URL. So that means at the very end of the survey, all participants are automatically directed back to Prolific, which depending on whatever platform you're using would be important. You could also change the survey message at the very end. And again, like lots of different things that you can do over in survey options. So the last thing I'm going to show you is distributions. So how do you actually distribute your survey? So you can either do an anonymous link, which you can copy and paste here. You can customize the link. So customize the link and then copy it from there. We can also have the survey sent as an email. So you might want to use this for like daily diary studies, or any sort of study where you'd be interested in all participants receiving the survey at a specific time. So over here, we would set up the contact list. So I have a contact list already set up, which is just mine, but the way that you would do that is by selecting new contact list, and then you can enter in all the different emails of the participants you'd want to receive the survey. And so because I already have that set up, I'm just going to go ahead and select my email, which I have set up in here. And then you can edit when you want them to receive the survey. So it can be sent within hours, days, or you can customize it so that it's sent at a certain time. So again, I would use this for like daily diary studies where potentially we want all participants to receive this at like 7 p.m. every day, and then set it up that way.
Oh yeah, another note for that, just to kind of to my RAs, because I know this is something we will be doing, is we can get IRB approval to reach out to people who have done the pre-screen. And so this is going to be a case that you would use this, because you can put everyone's email that we get from a pre-screen who has, so maybe they have selected some sort of thing, like maybe we want only people who are 21 or something like that. We can look in the pre-screen, find those emails, and then reach out to them. And so that's something that we will be doing in the future.
Great. And as far as loading in messages, so this is the email that participants would see. Let's say you want it to be customized depending on the survey that they're responding to. And so let's say I want to write, here you go, and I want every single person to get that. You can type that in here. Let's say this is a message that you want to save and use in the future. You can save as, and then name it, add it to your library, so that you can just load in the preloaded messages from here. Okay. So with that, I think that that's everything from the basic side. And then I'll hand everything over to Ashley.
All right, let me see if I can get the whole share screen thing down. Give me a moment. I want. Okay. Will you let me know if you're seeing it says IGI Interact Study 2 copy? Okay, perfect. All right. So yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of notes. I'm going to go into this actually. This survey, just to make a couple of notes on what Kareena said. So first is that when you are creating items, and one option that you have is to go into the rich content editor. And this is the time where you can go in and you can mess around with the text formatting. I try to do default, but I have noticed that for some reason or another, when you're in Qualtrics and you click default, it doesn't always just change it also, it is the same. So a really important thing to do is to look at the actual preview of the survey, and you might need to mess around with the data, with the text to make sure that it is all consistent, because I think that it can be really distracting if, like, for example, one item is in size 14 font versus another is in 16. And I don't know why it's not consistent when you use default. So sometimes I will just go to Arial or something and use like a specific font just to keep it all consistent. And I think that's the most important thing here, besides like which actual font, obviously not like Comic Sans, but yeah. So another thing with Rich Content Editor is you can mess around and you can bold, you can underline, you can center things here. And so this is where you're going to be able to get some more like nuanced editing. Another thing, like for example, that I did here is actually like created a table, and then I added this text into a table so that it was all bolded, had like a bolded line around it. So that's just like some of the stuff that you can put in there. You can also add in hyperlinks. And so that's like really helpful. For example, if maybe at the end of your survey, you want to say like, hey, if you're interested in finding out more information on this, click this link and like you can learn more about like protests in your area or whatever it is that you're wanting to link to. You can also add in an image. So then you would just click here. I often use images when I put in my consent and debrief forms because I find that that's the easiest and cleanest way for me to get that stamped document on there. And so also if I'm just like, maybe I have an item, for example, this is like a newer item, so I don't want to display it yet, but say it's like an item that has a bunch of circles in it or something, and you can label them all like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then have some items options where you have maybe something like that numbers that correspond to that, and then that's how you can kind of get at that sort of an item. So there's a lot of freedom that you have, especially when you go into the rich content editor. Okay, so the final thing, and you can see that sometimes I'm good at doing it and sometimes I'm not, is in this left-hand side, you can label your items. And this is really helpful because when you export it, you have them all cleanly labeled in a way that you're gonna want them to be labeled in your data processor. So I never have spaces in them because most like either R, SPSS, they don't allow for spaces. So I'll try to keep them really succinct and clear so that I know what items they are and so that they don't have spaces. Let's see. And you know what? I think this might be a good time to mention something that's also can be problematic sometimes, and this is specific to Qualtrics. When you do download the data, let's see. Nope, I want to. So when you download data, you can select that it will give you different numbers for different items and that you can select. And so the one problem is that those aren't always numbered the way that you would expect. So say you have like, you know, it's horizontal and it goes from left to right and you have 7 items. That first item isn't always going to be labeled as 1. And so I just like want to double check that whenever I export it. So I will have the original Qualtrics document that I'll download in a Word format. And then I'll also just do this with like, I'll do it twice, once with choice text and once with numeric values, just so I can see if the choice text really, how that really does line up with the numeric value, since it can be wonky sometimes. Okay, so this also reminds me of another thing that came to mind when Kareena was talking, and I just am thinking of it because I know a lot of times maybe we'll be running and something will come up and I'll need, you know, you to check in on someone with like a specific ID or something and make sure that like something didn't go wrong. Maybe they reached out to us and they said, hey, like this happened. And so one thing that I do is you can, in the data analysis section, you can go to add filter, and I use this a lot actually. And you can kind of filter out what you can see so that you can easily access data while it's running without having to download the whole file. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll often do something like response ID, and that way I can and I'll type in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you know, that's not a 1 in there, but if that is, then I can check in on that specific participant. And then another thing you can do here is you can just move these columns. So like if there's one in particular that you want to be able to access really easily, you can make that more easily accessible. And that's just helpful for like data management as you're running. This is particularly important when we're running like longer studies versus like if we have something up on Prolific, it's going to be done very soon. So we're usually not checking like while it's running on anything, nothing usually comes up, but this is helpful for like longer studies. Okay, so going back to kind of like the meat of what I was hoping to talk about, I'm going to go into survey flow. Let's see. Okay. So when you go into survey flow, actually, I kind of glanced over that, but it's probably pretty obvious. You can see it right here. It's labeled survey flow. So you can click this here. And when you're in survey flow, you can do a lot of things that you can also do outside of it. So like Kareena went a little bit over like display and skip logic, and you can also do that sort of a thing in survey flow. It's kind of up to your own discretion. Sometimes you'll realize like, okay, wait, this would be way easier to do on survey flow versus on display logic or vice versa. And what I often will do is I will write out like what I'm trying to get at, especially if it's something complicated. So one thing, for example, that I'm almost always doing is I'm assigning people to conditions. So anytime we're having some sort of a manipulation, we're probably going to have at least 2 conditions, right? And so you need to make sure that you label this. I have done this before where I didn't label it, and it was like a nightmare to kind of reverse and try to figure out who saw what. But a really easy way of doing that is you can put in a randomizer, like what I did right here, and I can walk you through that. So what you would do is say add new element, you would select randomizer, and then depending on how many conditions or what you're wanting, you can say like, okay, I want, and it's usually going to be just one of these elements. I always select evenly present elements. I can't think of many times that we'd want to unevenly display these things. So like we're wanting to get an even amount of people in condition 1 and condition 2. You know, there might be a time that that's not the case, but the default, especially for you guys, is to put in evenly present. And then you're going to say add new element below. And so that's when you're going to have your different conditions. So I'm going to move this outside of here. Okay. So what you're going to do now is say, let's see, a group. And that's like, I'm just going to mimic this here. So I'm going to label it condition 1. And then that's when I'm going to say, so for example, in this study, I wanted people in a specific condition to also have specific sort of text that would go along with that condition. And so this is when I'm going to get into a little bit of the piping that I'm going to discuss. And I'm not going to go into that quite yet, but we'll return to this in just a moment. So you can put a lot of different things in here. One of them is embedded data, and that will include stuff that you're going to pipe. Okay, so then you're also going to have your other group, and that's going to be condition. You can do this in a lot of different ways. This is just like one way that it's possible. So yeah, oops. So what this is going to do is this is just going to make sure that every person who participates is going to be assigned to either condition 1 or condition 2. At the very least, you're going to want it to say like something along the lines of like giving them a number. So like maybe that's just 1, and maybe this is like going to be just 2. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to edit that. So I would do something like condition equals 1. Oh, there we go. Sorry. 1. And this is going to be that. There we go. And then this one would be condition as well. And then the number for that would be like 2. So yeah, you can set like the name of the actual variable that you're creating. This is just giving that person a variable if that's what they're selected, and then you assign them a number. So this will then export as like condition is either 1 or 2, and that's essentially like what we want, right? When we're assigning people to conditions. So yeah, that was a little unclear. So if any of y'all have questions, let me know. But okay, cool. So going on from there, another thing that we'll do a lot is we'll kind of mess around with the order that things are presented in. And so this means that we'll use an if-then statement. So for example, I have a lot of them here. And what this says is if a participant has this variable, which is something that I assigned them, if it's equal to 1, and they said, and in this case, I was saying if they were assigned to condition 1 and they said that they do not have a relevant experience, so we were asking them about something in particular and they said no, we obviously don't want them to see all of the items that would relate to like if they did have that, because they just reported that that doesn't relate to them. So now what this means is I'm actually assigning them, and this is obviously more complicated than most studies that you would do, but now I'm assigning them to a different condition. So now I've made it so that their condition is 3 as opposed to 1 or 2. And now I'm changing some other piping, which we'll talk about in a second. But what I could also do is say, perhaps I don't want them to do anything related to that study. And now I'm going to have them do a separate sort of like a separate scale or something. And so that's when I can say, okay, I want it to branch to, and you can add, yeah, so we already added that condition. So then I could put an element here. So for example, I could pool like a specific scale like this, and then I could put it in here. Where are we? There we go. Where now if they, you know, didn't qualify for that condition, those original conditions, now they're just going to go do this, maybe a completely different study, a completely different survey, but they can all be within one Qualtrics survey. And I think that can ease through some of this like confusion of like, okay, well, what do I do with this participant? A lot of times, you know, if we're studying someone and maybe we have a pre-screen and they don't qualify for that pre-screen, this is like a great time to use branching like this, and you could just have all of the different sort of items that you would prefer someone who doesn't, you know, fit one study for them to do another study. Okay, so.
Hey Ash, can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
I was just noticing that one other little pro tip is like when you're scrolling around in Qualtrics survey flow here and you're moving around blocks and adding branch logic and all this stuff, if it's kind of a long survey or a long experiment, you have a lot of different blocks, you can see like she had to scroll all the way down and then like drag that thing all the way up. One thing that I found is a little helpful is on the top right, you see zoom out and zoom in. If you click zoom out, it helps you, you can click it maybe multiple times. It kind of helps zoom out everything and it allows you to see more blocks at once. So that's sort of helpful if you're trying to get a better bird's eye view of what your survey looks like, and you can see all the blocks more easily. And then while you're there, if you just click like one block, just click on it. Yeah, and then it's highlighted with that blue thing. If you use your arrow keys, you can like move that block up and down, I believe. Yeah.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
So that's actually, I find that like from like a moving things around perspective, I find it way easier to like arrow up and arrow down that block than to like drag and hold it and try and like kind of scroll up in the page while I'm holding down this block. So just from like a user ease standpoint, if you guys ever, the URAs are ever in like this organizing a survey mode, just keep in mind you can like click on a thing and use your arrow keys to like move blocks around, and you can zoom in and zoom out to get better bird's eye view of what the survey flow looks like. That was it.
That's super helpful. Thanks. I've never known that. So that's super helpful, especially because I will often have studies exactly like this where it's all complex and then I'm like searching through the thing and trying to drag them, which I find it's very difficult to drag in here. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think the other thing I wanted to mention was randomizing through here. So I'm just going to say, for example, that perhaps I want to randomize my blocks. So Kareena went over a little bit of how to randomize items within a block. And now it's possible we want to kind of counterbalance a manipulation or something like that. And so if that were the case, we would add randomizer, again, the same sort of thing that we did before. And now we're going to say, maybe you probably are going to want all of those, the items that you're going to show to be shown. So like if, let's say we're going to make these 3 relationship and interpersonal, emotional processing, and event perception, we're going to randomize all of those and how they're displayed. We're going to say that's 3 blocks and we want them all to be displayed. We just want them to be displayed differently. And then we're going to say evenly display elements again. And now I'm going to just drag this here, drag that there, and drag that there. And so this way we're going to just be able to kind of control the way that it's being presented so that everyone, you know, is basically the aim of that is so that no one is seeing anything in a specific order, and we're going to hopefully account for order effects with that. And so that's something that's really good for you to look at, because especially when we're doing like a lot of surveys and stuff, it's possible that maybe I didn't think about a specific items, like the potential for it to have an order effect. So if you guys mention that, please, like, if you notice that, please mention it. I think it's very possible that details like this can, you know, get looked over from like one study to another. Okay, so going on now to using piping. So piping, I actually just was introduced to this last year, and I found it to be really helpful, especially if you are asking participants either to like give you like the name of like themselves or like someone else, and you're trying to make maybe like sort of an instant come to life more, you can use that person's name. If you're trying to, if you have an item and you want to make sure that you're referring to a specific person, then you can use piping to do that. And so another cool thing is if you have different conditions and you want them to display kind of different text for each condition, this is a nice workaround, because the other option would just be making like completely separate blocks and then only showing that person that's in that one condition, this one block versus another. But if you use piping, you can use one block and just change out the language used in a specific item. So what I mean by that is I'm going to use just my example. So I'm asking people to talk about a time where they were, they confronted or they didn't confront someone when they said something either racially offensive or just generally offensive. And so I have the words racially and generally assigned to different conditions. And now I'm just going to enter that in instead of making like a bunch of different blocks. So this is why when you go to my randomizer and you see this here, oops. So for example, I have condition A and then condition 1 and condition 2. So I'm numbering them, of course, but then I'm also saying topic A, and we're just going to look at topic A for now. You can disregard topic B, is racially, and then topic A for condition 2 is generally. So now when I pipe in this text, it's going to just fill in either of those words. So how does that look like, and how do we do that? Yes, I do not want to say. Okay, so what this is going to look like here is a bunch of garbled letters, and this is where I'm referring to that one item where I typed in either generally or racially. So how did I do that? Let's pretend like this isn't here. And I just say, okay, I want to add in some pipe text. And then I go into survey question. And then I'm going to find that actual item. So it was, oh, sorry. And that's going to, because this is actually just, it's using data that I created that is basically going to be embedded data. So anytime that we create something, so like condition, if you actually assign someone like a specific number and like that you created using the embedded data, then you're going to go into embedded data, and that's how you're going to access it. So I'm going to say, all right, I want to click not condition A because that would give me the number 1 that I assigned them, but you're going to click topic A because that's the actual word, right? And so now, depending on whatever condition they were assigned to, this will show you that actual word. I want to now show you a different way of doing piping where, let's see, where you actually use a participant's entered data and then you enter that into a question. So right here we have them name their friend. Let's see if I can find where they name their friend. Oh yeah, so we say, please write their first name here. And that's where the participant will enter that actual that friend's name. So I might get this confused because I always do, but when you're accessing this, you're not going to want, you have to be careful not to access this actual item because you don't want it to add in, please write their first name here within each time you're trying to reference that person's name. You want that actual inputted data there. So I'm going to go back into, and actually you don't even need to do this in survey flow. So I'm going to find a time that I did do this. Okay, so for example, now I want to ask a question about that friend they mentioned, and you can see here I entered in that piped text. So I'm going to pretend like I didn't have that in there yet, and now I'm going to say, okay, what did that person say or do? I'm going to say piped text, and this time it is a survey question, and I'm going to go in and find that one where I asked them to list their friend. So please write their first name here. You're gonna want, I think it's called question text because that's gonna be the actual response, I believe, and I'm gonna make sure that that's the case because I'm pretty sure that this will just actually add in, please write their first name. Let's see if that was what it was. Nope, that's not it. Okay, so pretend like I didn't say that. We're gonna go in again and now do it right. So again, we're gonna go to please write their first name. And I guess clicking on the actual question will give us what they inputted. It seems a little bit counterintuitive, but I guess that's the case. So this will give you that actual answer. Does that make sense? I know that it might have been confusing because I had to switch it, but okay, cool. Okay, so now what you can do is pretty much any time, and I do this a bunch in this survey because this whole survey is just about that one friend. Anytime I want to add in that person, what I end up just doing typically is I'll just copy the one time I do insert pipe text because that took like, I don't know, 10 seconds. And if I needed to do it a bunch of times, I don't want to have to worry about that. So I've already copied that. And now I can just say like, okay, I'm going to add it in there. I'm going to add it in here. Like I can just go and add it in wherever I need to do that throughout this survey. Let's see. The only issue is that when you do that, it is going to, you are going to have to mess around with the formatting. So like, for example, here where it's bolded, you're going to need to go in and make sure that that looks all the same. And so that is another thing to just look for because it seems a little bit odd if like, every time it says like Ashley or something, it's like super bold or like super thin or something off like that. Okay, give me a second. I'm just gonna make sure. Okay, embedded data, piping. Okay, so I'm now gonna go into controlling quotas. So that's where I'm gonna pull up a different survey. Okay, so in this survey, can you see the separate survey now? Yeah, it shouldn't change. Okay. So in this survey, I had a pre-screen and I wanted to make sure that there were people of a specific ethnicity and then gender. And so there were a couple different things that they were required to have in order to participate in the study, but I was looking at cross-race friendships. And so each person, I was looking at like 2 specific races. So I was looking at like white and Latinx people, and then they each needed to have a friend who belonged to the other race. And because I was looking at self-disclosure, which can vary very differently between men and women, I wanted to keep men and women within each racial group even. So what that looked like then, and I'm pretty sure this is in tools, but let me just double check. Yeah, so you're gonna go to tools and then you're gonna click quotas. And it looks a little funky in mine because actually this doesn't look funky, cool. Because this is a copy. But yeah, so basically what's gonna happen is if you have a pre-screen, and this is kind of questionable because depending on what platform you're using, you might not be able to use a pre-screen. But if you can, set up a quota system, and you can label it to be like kind of whatever sort of reference group it is. So for me, I wanted to make sure I had equal groups across these, like across women and then across race. And so what this looks like then is a lot of different sort of if-thens basically. And so if someone was white male, they needed to select what's your ethnicity, and they had to say white. So then I collected the item, I collected white for the answer to what is your ethnicity. And I said is selective. And then for this, it is important that you use and not or. So, because I need to be white and this. So the or would like change that up and you'd be looking at someone different. And then you would say, how do you identify? And so that's the gender item that I have. And then they would have to select man. And so then that's why you would also click selected. This I have as well because, like I mentioned before, they had to also have a friend who belonged to a specific group. And so because I wanted to make sure I was only looking at people who fit that quota, but also qualified for the pre-screen, that's why I had to add in these pre-screen items as well. Because like say I had a bunch of white men who took the study and then they actually didn't qualify for the full study, then I don't want that to go toward my quota. So I think you just have to kind of think about the logic here, and it takes like multiple times doing it. And I could say like really the best way of checking is to just do it and take it with all the possible options someone might take it and just check. And that's how I really just troubleshooted this. So yeah, I had all my other sort of like qualifications that they needed to pass. And so if they pass literally all of those and were the specific demographics, then that counted toward this quota. You see the same thing for Latino males. So what's your ethnicity? They have to answer that they're Latino, and then as selected, how do you identify? Man. And so on and so forth for women and for Latina women as well. Yeah, so just like, so you can see it, if you're adding a quota, it's gonna look like this. You can set up whatever number you want. You can use a lot of different things too. So I don't know, so say for example, you were running the study before and then like you had to stop maybe because of coronavirus or anything that might have happened, and now you're starting up again. That's when you could use embedded data and then say, okay, I want to use like this one. I didn't need to have a condition labeled, but it was like a within study. But if I did have condition, then I could say, hey, I want to get like 50 more people of this condition alone. You don't need to make a whole new study because you're only needing to look at one condition. You can just specify that here. And then you could be like, say, you know, if you labeled condition 1 as like one condition as 1, then you can just put that here, and then you'd get only 100 people who are in that one condition. Okay. That's not like a great example because I'd probably go about that differently. But anyway, that's just one example of like how you could do this. Okay. Let me check what else I want to talk about. Yeah, I mean, I think that is pretty much it now. Oh, I did want to go over the randomization. So, okay, here's a good example because this is the prompt that I would want everyone to see at the beginning. I don't want this to be randomized. And then I also don't want this to be randomized as well, because it's just another prompt basically. And then all of these items are totally fine to be randomized, but then this one's not fine to be randomized. So I'm wondering how I did that. Let's see. It's possible I just didn't randomize it. Okay, so I didn't randomize it because I'd probably have to separate that into different groups, which I'll go over this. So say, for example, you have like a prompt here, and then you have some items, and you want all of these items to be randomized, but then now you have another prompt, and you want all of those items to be randomized. For me, the only way I've found to be able to randomize each separately is to separate them into 2 different blocks. So say I separated this into its own block, and now I'll just deal with the first items here. So I'll just go into question randomization, advanced randomization. I don't want this one to be randomized because that's the one that shows this chart. I don't want this one to be randomized because it has questions about, like, it just tells the people another prompt basically. But I do want pretty much all of these items. So I'm going to highlight those and then I'm going to throw those into there. And you can see pretty clearly, okay, cool, these are all going to be randomized. And then hopefully what I would have done then is taken all of these items and put them into another block. And so that's how you can randomize. I think I almost always use this sort of a randomization technique just because I pretty much always have the prompt at the top of the page because I want to make sure that that's like salient to everyone who's taking the test. You can do like these different things, like, so maybe I want to say I only want like one of these 3 approaches to be displayed. And then I would probably say evenly present elements. I never have a time that has been applicable. So yeah. And you can also select how many questions you want to have in each page. I usually don't mess around with that because I would have, if I cared about that, then I probably would have like broken them into different scales, but I'm sure that there's different times that might be necessary. Okay, so I think that's actually it. I kind of went over embedding graphics. I've never embedded a video actually, so I don't know if that's something. I have embedded a GIF before, and I think that's pretty much the same. Let's see, I can go to that. Let's see. So I'm going to make sure I don't make actual changes to this because this is the real study. But for this one, I wanted people to think that the program was processing some results. Let's see. Here we go. Nope. Sorry. And so what I did here is, actually, this is really useful because I think that there are a lot of times that you maybe want participants to think that something's being processed just so that's a little bit more believable. And so in this case, I inserted in a GIF that I found. And basically what I just did I say insert media? Okay, so I think I'm pretty sure what I did was insert media, and then I went to select file from library, and I had uploaded that GIF. I don't think that I used the URL. I'm not sure how that works, or if it like actually works. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I have. Very just like things here and there of like what I've experienced. Does anyone have questions, or does anyone have thoughts that came up? Like, I know Diego's comments were really helpful.
I just have a quick thing to add for embedding videos. So if you have the video and you like have it on your computer, you would just embed it as like a normal graphic that you upload. But you can also embed videos from YouTube, for instance. And the way you would do that, actually, Ashley, can I share my screen for like a second to do this, and then?
Yeah, I'm done. So just
okay.
Take over.
Cool. Yeah. So I have a video that I embedded in this survey right here. It's this nature video, and it's very straightforward. The only thing you have to do is make sure that you go to HTML view. And then any YouTube video, there's a setting on YouTube where you can choose to embed it, and then you just simply copy the link in here. And then if you go to normal view, it's going to show the actual video. The only thing that I haven't figured out yet, and maybe someone else knows this, is how to get the video to play by itself, like start as soon as the participant is on the page. So you're kind of relying on the participant to click on it, but what you can do is set a timer. So they're gonna have to be on the page anyway. They might as well watch the video, hopefully. But yeah, that's how you would embed a YouTube video, or I think most websites that have any sort of video material have a link to embed it in a page.
I will say that I found it a little more helpful to like download the actual video file and insert it rather than link to YouTube for two reasons. One, because sometimes at the end of a YouTube video, it'll suggest other videos that you should watch. You know how like it's like a recommended video because you watch this nature video, here are like 6 other nature videos. So I don't know if I've looked into like how you can prevent that recommendation from YouTube because it's linking from YouTube to come up. And you might not want participants to like see that or like get distracted by it or click around and stuff. And then also the other reason is that sometimes like people take videos down from YouTube, right? So if this was like an important stimuli that you were linking to and then randomly someone took it down and you were like unaware that that was no longer a thing, now you've like lost that stimuli. And so I think it's good practice to like save a hard copy of the video locally as well. But yeah, just like a side note.
Yeah, true. But yeah, sorry, that was my only like note. Apart from that, you guys did a great job. I actually, some of those things I really didn't know how to do, so this was very helpful for me.
I did just play around. Sorry, this is like a side note thing. I did just play around with it, and you know how you can do like the heat map thing? So I can show.
What's the heat map thing?
Yeah, I'll share my screen again. So what you can do is make it so that in the question items, you go to heat map and it'll show like where people click. So one thing that you could do with the video is you could set up the heat map so that it will show you where they've clicked. So if a participant has clicked in the area where the like play button is for a video, I think that could be like a way that's like kind of getting at like, did they if they clicked it, then they probably like watched it, as at least you could see if they didn't click it. And so yeah, I know that this is also like a helpful way of if you have like some sort of image and you want them to like click up like an area in that image, you can track that, and I think that it can be really useful, especially for the more perceptual sort of like studies that are run. So yeah, I think like heat map and like hotspot are underused, but they're helpful. Oh, you know what? I did just remember one final thing that's also really helpful, and it's constant sum. And so this is something that's cool, like, and I've done this before when I ask participants, like, what percentage of your friends belong to this demographic? And so each of these items would be like a different racial group. And so I'm like, okay, in your neighborhood, how many people in your neighborhood are white, are Black, are Latinx? And this needs to add up to 100, right? Because like otherwise that would not be accurate. And so this makes sure that their entries add up to 100. And I like this a lot for like the intergroup sort of contact stuff. And I'm sure there's a lot of other ways to use it. But I think there's a lot of creativity that can be done in these items, and I don't think we use it all the time. So yeah, that is my final thing.
Ashley, if they're filling this out, and let's say they have, 50% this group and 70% this group, will it tell them, no, these values can't be? So it gives them feedback and forces them.
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks everyone for all.
Yeah, thank you.
I learned stuff too. This is great.
This was super useful, and I think most of us don't realize all the different things you can actually do in Qualtrics. It really allows you to do all kinds of really cool kinds of stuff. I mean, when I first started using Qualtrics, none of this stuff existed, and I haven't really like looked at it like this in probably like 10 years. So thank you guys for doing this. Any last kind of words of advice for anyone out there who's watching this that's kind of getting started, or any kind of roadblocks that you guys face that you just want to maybe shed some light on?
Just be prepared to do your own experiment a lot of times. Like, even if, you know, you do everything right in survey flow and everything, you should be like, have a few of your friends and like do it together or something to make sure that it works. Because it can get very complicated. And I think that's something that we're gonna talk about in the next sort of webinar, where like, if you get past like a few conditions and, you know, a few like if then branches, it might get complicated and you might lose track. So yeah, I also find it really useful to do like a diagram, like actually draw on a piece of paper, like the conditions and the ramifications for more complex designs.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, that's how I always troubleshoot. And I also would really recommend to just reach out to Qualtrics. And I've heard this from so many people, but myself included, like they're always so nice and really helpful. And I've even asked things that I ended up realizing were super like self-explanatory, but they were still very helpful and like ready to answer that. And they can help with like troubleshooting, and they'll explain things, because sometimes like you're like, well, what does this mean exactly if I do this logic? Like, how does it function within Qualtrics? And they can answer that. So I would recommend that.
All right, so I think that concludes our first workshop. So next week, we're going to be doing a little bit more advanced Qualtrics, particularly if you're interested in looking at social interactions online. And yeah, and I think Juana will probably be leading that one. So thanks everyone for putting this together and for watching and contributing, and thanks guys.